Thank you so much. Of course, that was the short graphic letting you know that 50.7% of our young people are below the age of 15. And again, 36.4 million of this country is young people. And together with me in the studio, I have young people. I have Kemi here, and I have Awel. How are you guys feeling this morning? Let's start with Kemi right here.
I'm doing good. It's been a very busy week. I have things going on and a lot of projects that I've been working on. So I'm glad it's Friday.
Well, how do you feel about the morning today?
It's great. I just only have to put a disclaimer about the young aspect of it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know you're as young as you feel. But I think, when you talk about 50 plus something, being under the age of 15, and then we really become senior citizens, you know what I mean? So I think putting young into context, I think is also very important. Yeah.
Well, the assumption is that young people are unemployed. I want to first dispel that rumor. Right. Please tell us what you do, because people might think you're unemployed.
What do? I'm really a social entrepreneur. I'm a person of ideas, and I try to pursue these ideas into enterprises or workable projects and things like that. So I consider myself a social entrepreneur in the sense that I pursue projects and ideas and making them into viable projects.
And Kemi, people might think you're unemployed, and I know you're not.
I know, I'm still trying to convince myself I'm not unemployed. No, you know, I was saying he's an entrepreneur. I say I'm an entrepreneur. So I try and deal in all things art, even if that's not my talent. So whether it's working with musicians, whether it's working with visual artists, I find ways to use art and make them into businesses, just like an entrepreneur would do.
All right, let's start with the aspect of art. Art is something that's at the core of many young people. And in your art world, what would you say is the participation of young people in art?
So what I'm seeing is that it's acceptable to be an artist as a hobby, as a young person. But now when you go to university, then you have to be like, okay, that was fun, now let me go be a lawyer, a doctor, engineer, you know, a journalist, an entrepreneur. And even, this goes down to the point system. So if you do badly in secondary, you go to the drama school. So what this does, A, is that people who are in the drama school don't actually want to be there. It's because they did badly. And B, the ones that actually want to be in the drama school are surrounded by people who don't want to be there. And there's this assumption that, artists, you're a failure, you couldn't be a doctor. And I always tell people, actually, the highest score that I got in secondary was math. Funny enough, I even did better than in drama. So it's not that I couldn't be anything else, it's that this is my purpose, this is my calling. So for me, what I'd love to see more young people do is take ownership of it, take pride of it, and not feel like, oh, I'm a failure, I wasn't a lawyer, I wasn't this. Because you actually can make a lot of money through the arts, you can make a lot of change through the arts, and you can do similar things. Like I consider myself a journalist, I consider myself an entrepreneur, but through the lens of art.
I must add, she's actually a journalist. If you go to her Snapchat, she's entirely journalism there. But we'll move on to Awel shortly. Kemi talks about the point system, something that was defined by the generation before us, which became our education system. And you've worked a lot with young people. I know you're running away from saying that you're director for Leo Africa.
I enjoy
Young Achievers Awards and all this. What would you say is the calling for young people? What's this generation's call? Is it to redefine or to take over the ruins from what has been passed on to them?
I think it's we live in a very fast-changing world, and I think at an individual level, people have to also very quickly define their own place and their own way of contributing and just making their life better, and also how they contribute to society. So the world is changing so fast, and at the macro level, you still have challenges of some sort of a collective thinking in terms of cause. When you say generation's call, I think at certain points in time you had generations sort of being rallied around a cause, and therefore that sort of guided the collective mindset of what needed to be done. I think right now we don't sort of have something that's rallying people around the same cause, and therefore people feeling like, oh, we are part and parcel of like liberation, for example, or independence movement, or something, you know, something that sort of ties everybody into the same agenda. I think right now the biggest call is for self-actualization in terms of economic opportunity, self-fulfillment, and living a purposeful life, and so all these different things. And for our countries like Uganda or in Africa, I think it remains a very big challenge. If you can't, if you can't secure yourself financially and economically, it becomes a bit difficult for all the other aspects, the aspirations to, sort of coming into play. So I think the biggest, when you say the generation's call, I think is to find out financial freedom, financial and economic freedom first, and then, and as Kemi was saying, and then to really allow young people to follow passions and to make themselves believe, or society to make young people believe that they can actually be the best that they can be at what they choose to do.
Yeah. Both of you are entrepreneurs, and you mentioned about financial success and the like, and I really need you guys to be honest about this. What the figures tell us is that Uganda is the most entrepreneurial country in the world. But also what the figures tell us is that 6 in 10 businesses collapse before their 5th birthday. By the 10th birthday, only 2 of the first 10 businesses that started survive. By their 25th, only 1, which would explain why, for example, the only long-reigning Ugandan companies like Mukwano are also on the brink of collapse. As entrepreneurs, does this thing scare you as young people?
I didn't know those figures. Now I'm like, oh my goodness. No, it is very scary. But I think as an entrepreneur, that's your way. You have to find different avenues. You have to make those 10 businesses so that if the 9 fail, you still have your 1. You have to be attacking from every side. And I think, just knowing those figures, it allows a consciousness and for you to keep going at it, because I actually think knowledge is power. To know that is, you can kind of prevent it before it happens. But I really think it's about reinventing yourself and also looking at how things change. I think a lot of times businesses, they find a model that works for now, and then 5 years they're still using the model that worked for 5 years, but your clientele has changed, social media has changed, but you don't want to change because you're like, no, but it worked. So I think we also have to look at the world around us and not be afraid of change and respond to what's going on around.
Well, you work with leaders. This is a question that really you must address.
I tell you what, I think the failure of, first of all, as your statistics showed on TV, we have a very young country. So even many of these entrepreneurial ventures are still really being tested out. In terms of Ugandans, according to your statistics, 78%, I think, is under the age of 30. So if we imagine like the people who are sort of starting out in the last 5-10 years, the people who have been starting out these ventures are still young people who are either failing and trying and failing and whatever, and that's fine. I think there's something that comes out of that, from that process. So I think we're yet to really say that it's a failure, because I think to achieve success in business or in entrepreneurship, there's going to have to, I personally have had to do a number of things that have failed at different points in time. But I don't really look at it as failure in the sense that it's every step is a lesson, is something to learn, there's you get better and it takes you to the next stage, as long as you don't look at it as a failure in a negative sense. So and I have to say, it's such when you travel around, especially in Africa, and you come back to Uganda, it's amazing, like when you see the amount of talent and innovation and creativity within Ugandan youth. So I think this reservoir of experience, and even from the failing processes and things like that, can be harnessed to build like a real entrepreneur generation that can actually build thriving businesses and entrepreneurs.
So I noticed this conversation has been going on for about 7 minutes, and none of us has said Museveni, none of us has said Besigye, none of us says, because our political leadership defines us. And every time we're on this show, you can't go 5 minutes without someone saying the problem is Museveni. The problem is
government,
NRM.
so-
Why do young people not define themselves as a political leadership? Is it something that you think is a good idea for young people to define themselves outside what the political leadership defines them to be?
I would say it's because we haven't lived outside of any other political leadership. So we don't know what it is to live outside of it. So it's our norm. So I think the generation above can say, it's this leader or it's that leader, because they're comparing it to a time before and after. We don't really have that. You know, in my whole year, my whole life, I've had one president, you know. So whether you want to blame things on that person or you want to blame things on opposition, you can go ahead and do that, but it's not really going to change anything that you're doing. So I think it is a good thing to define yourself outside of that leadership, because then I think you stop taking this attitude of like, it's their fault, I'm going to wait till something happens, or it's opposition's fault, no, you need to be the change. You need to do what you can do here and now. And I think that's something we're seeing in America. You know, they've got a president a lot of people don't like, but what's happening is people are forming coalitions and they're making the change and they're trying to, I think it's terrible to say, but the art scene is going to thrive because a lot of people are going to come together and try, you know, be the change they want to see.
Well, this mindset change, what do you have to say about it?
The mindset change, you mean like young people?
Yes, because Kemi is suggesting that there's a mindset change here. We don't know. We haven't lived outside any leadership, one, but also our mindset is not that things are going to go wrong and we'll just keep complaining. We have to be the change. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think for political leadership to be relevant into lives of especially young people, it has sort of reflect the aspirations of the young generation. We were talking about the creative arts earlier on with Kemi. I think that's one of the things that I think political leadership in Africa or Uganda in particular is not understanding, like the centrality of the arts into how people think and how they create and how they live. I think the creative arts are the center of almost everything that we do, whether it's entrepreneurship, innovation, the aspect of art and the creative is really embedded even in leadership, in political leadership and social engagement. So I think, and that's the millennial, Kemi's generation, the millennials, which is the young generation, they're really looking, they want to live lives of purpose. They want to have jobs that they want to create, but they also want to live purposeful lives. And you can see they're intentional on what they do. So I think for political leadership to be relevant to this generation, you have to understand the young generation, especially the millennials, and so really sort of speak to them. If you don't, they just ignore you, you know, because they've created, and this is a credit now to talking about Museveni and the government. I think in a way Uganda is because in the liberal nature of our economy and the way we organize economically, it allows people to thrive in their corners and in their places. So people can just do their things and just ignore you. So if you really want to be part and parcel of the growth of this generation, you have to sort of like start trying to understand what they think and what they want and speak to that.
Talking of politics and things we shouldn't ignore, please note that we'll be talking to guys at Accord about the LC1 elections anytime from now. As you can see the hall there at Protea. There's a conversation ongoing on the LC1 elections. Of course, the biggest standout point is, should people line up behind the candidates they want? Should they not do the secret ballot that we know? And will it produce fair, effective leadership from that? But back into the studio, Kemi, I know, and I'm slotting in here, simple advert. You're hosting a show tonight, Friday. It's about art. Why stage shows on art? What propels you to stage these shows on art?
So this particular show, Akadope First Friday, it was inspired. I'd seen an artist called Mo Roots performing at a wedding, and I was completely perplexed how I'd never seen her name, you know, on big concerts. Yes. See? I'm like, how don't you know Mo Roots?
I don't know Mo Roots.
I'm like, how don't you
know?
No, because we're not supporting our artists, you know. I felt like we're choosing 5 musicians, and then we're starting to believe, oh, we're not as talented as South Africa. We're not as talented as Nigerian musicians. We're not as talented as Americans. When we have concerts, we have to bring people from outside. And I was looking at this woman, and I'm like, you are a star. You are as good as any other artist that I've seen outside in the States or in South Africa and so forth. And so I started to keep looking around, and there were more roots artists. I was seeing more and more artists. I'm like, why don't I know your name? And what I started to find out is that there wasn't a regular platform. So I started this First Friday so that, one, artists have a platform to perform at where I'm providing, you know, a rehearsal, a band, and so forth. And some of the artists don't need it, but some of the artists are starting and do need that platform. But also it allows the audience to interact with that. So some of the people would know this poet, they would know this hip-hop artist, and they would know the soul, but the audiences weren't colliding. So I was like, what happens if we just make a katogo of dope artists and share the artists?
I also must note, you're very intentional on the cast, because I see social-political poets like Jason, I see social-political artists like J.C. Muyonjo.
Yes.
Why them? Why not Chameleon? Why not Bebe Cool? Why not King Saha, for example?
Yeah, I'm very intentional in everything I do. I think that I talk a lot about purpose and calling. And I think when you know your purpose, my biggest purpose, change the narrative of the stories we're hearing on the continent. So I always choose artists, and I naturally gravitate towards artists that are doing that, whether it's how they sing. Kenneth Mugabe was at Akadope. Wow, I'd never seen something like that. Why? You know? So JC, Jason, and Taro, I think it's going to provoke the audience to think in a different way. Chameleon, you know him. He doesn't need this platform, you know, and that's no disrespect to say I don't listen to your music. I listen to your music. But these artists, I think, are shaping the way people can think and can make the change. And I think once you figure out your purpose, everything must be in line with it.
Talk of shaping the way people think. Again, I must slot in an advert here for AWEL. AWEL runs the Economic Summit, which basically shapes the way people think about the economy. You run Leo Africa, which shapes the way people think about Africa, leadership, the continent's image. Why? Why didn't you start an organization, for example, that sells maize and get money for yourself?
I think, I mean, as you said, being intentional about the things that we do. I think from earlier on, I mean, I love working with young people. I think mindset of a young generation is extremely important. And so, I mean, society is shaped by how people think and how people behave. So the challenges we face in Africa and also in our own communities here in Uganda and things like that, you realize that if we give, I mean, I use my own story about the people who've given me support and the people who have sort of believed in my crazy ideas and things like that and encouraged me on, and the things I've been able to do. So with Leo Africa, the work we're doing with Leo Africa Institute, being, you know, setting it up as a thought leaders platform in making sure we have leadership that emerges, whether it's in the business sector, in the social space, or in politics, that of a servant leadership nature, you know. And okay, I use the word servant leadership, and I'm sure you're going to follow up on that. But the idea is that we need a whole generation of young people who aspire to lead, but they understand their own commitment to making sure we leave no one behind. So the programs we have, which is the Economic Forum, it brings together all the different young actors and emerging leaders within the space of economics and business and social engagement. And we, you know, bring in also the governments and agencies. So we want to put young people at the center of development, you know, put their voice at the center of development. How are we developing? How are we shaping our policies? How do we contribute? Who does what?
I'm going to follow up on the servant leader now, but in a different way. When you look at the average age of the top 4 leaders of countries in East Africa, the average age of those in Uganda is 68. The average age of those in Kigali is 45. The average age of those in Kenya, for example, is I think somewhere between 40 to 50. That says that in the region, in terms of decision making at the top of leadership, Uganda has very old people making decisions for a very young population. and yet other places where we see younger populations in small margins have young people making decisions for them. Is this something we should worry about, that the leaders are not serving the purpose of the populations?
You know, I think that's a very good question, and I think it's something we need to reflect on, I think, and do more. Sometimes you have to do things to be seen to be doing things as a way of indicating to, you know, informing the general population in terms of how they see themselves. So, like being purposefully, for example, having a vice president who is in the young generation bracket, I think sends a message. Having a woman speaker sends a message to the women. So some of these things have to be done intentionally to send a message in terms of. So maybe it's something the senior leadership in politics should think about and consider if they really want to, you know, move along with the young generation. But having said that, I think yes, you could also do that, but you can also end up with young people with a very old mindset. What I mean by that is, you see this some of MPs. All our MPs, like almost 70%, are under the age, under the 40 age bracket.
Yeah.
But do they really advance any causes or agendas that are favorable to young people? Do they know people like Kemi exist? Do they know about all these young entrepreneurs who are thriving? Do they go into parliament and look at legislation and say, we need to bring our young generation, which are innovative and creative, you know, we need to empower them more. Let's scrutinize the budget and see what the budget is. Let's scrutinize the youth livelihood project and see, is it really delivering? No. So you could have all these young people in leadership and they're just not. So it's a mindset issue. So what we need to invest in more is to make sure that, you know, the young people who aspire to leadership, who put themselves out there, are the sort of leaders that we want.
Yeah. Kemi, I'm going to come to you now. Final thoughts. Art is used as a bridge everywhere in society. Talk about the black movement, talk about slavery. Art was used as a bridge to get to people's hearts. How are you using art to make the bridge that Awel is saying? For example, using art to bridge young people to the politicians.
So I always say that art changes people, people change the world. So I think in terms of how we're using art to bridge politicians and young people is that a lot of people tell me that my plays don't provide solutions. They're like, okay, that was so thought provocative and you've told me a lot about HIV and how this relates to policies and government policies and so forth, but you haven't provided a solution. And I tell them, yeah, it's not my job.
Exactly.
It's your job. It's your job to provide a solution. Like, no, but I feel like if you had provided a solution, like, what should we do about this age? I said, it's not my job. My job was to reflect society back at you, and it's your job to go. But because of what you're saying is, there's this mindset that, oh, we'll wait to hear from the higher people to tell us what to do. No. And they come into the theater thinking the same thing. We'll wait to hear what Kemi tells us to do. No. If you're a journalist, go write about it. If you're a pianist, go write a song about it. If you're a lawyer, go look into the research about it, because I think I always try, or go question your politicians about it. It's not me. You're not going to use my name, Kemi said. But I see one job in terms of theater and the arts. Reflect the society back to your audience and let them figure out what to do.
Yeah. One job, our generation uses that word. You have only one job. So now you have only one job to tell us, how do we bridge the gap between the young and the old? How do we create the generational bridge in a harmonious way where the old don't feel attacked by the young and the young don't feel attacked by the old, but we coexist?
How do we do that? I think, as I said, we need to be intentional about that. I think it's a big issue in Uganda. As you've seen on your statistics, I think the people above the age of 54 is 1.8 million out of 38 million people. So I think that 1.8 million people really need to really think very critically about how they bring along the younger generation. As I said, it's not enough to just put tokenism here and there. I think they have to be very deliberate in how, in their own responsibility to shape mindsets of young generation, to mentor and be examples. So that has to be intentional. And I don't think it's happening at a large scale. I don't think our people are losing in the business, whether it's in private sector or government, or people are not losing space or losing time, sleep, overthinking how do we bring everybody along.
Thank you so much, Awel. And talking of bridging and harmony, we must bridge now to the Accord conversation that's happening at the Protea Hotel. Of course, the Minister for Local Government, Honorable Tom Butime, we are told, has arrived. And the conversation will start there shortly on local council elections in Uganda and the test toward democratic decentralization. Thank you so much for having us.